This season began with promise for the Phoenix Suns and high expectations, with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and Bradley Beal forming one of the most menacing trios in the league. The Suns were predicted to destroy the Western Conference and pursue a serious title run. What has actually come to be known, though, is that it's fast becoming one of the most disappointing starts in super team history thus far in the NBA. The $400 million experiment is turning into a farce, what with injuries, dubious roster construction, and a lack of cohesion. Today, we take a look at how we got here, why things are falling apart, and what the future holds for the Suns. The Phoenix Suns have made headlines by acquiring Bradley Beal in order to build a super team that could potentially dominate the league. Indeed, on paper, adding Beal to an already intimidating lineup consisting of Devin Booker and Kevin Durant saw a sure shot for a championship. However, the unfortunate turn of events as the season has progressed reveals that this is one gamble that has gone very wrong. From the construction of the roster to dwindling production from Beal and his frailty, this trade seems to be a cautionary tale coming up soon in NBA team building. First of all, the fit was bad from the start. Beal is a score-first guard, which never matches well with Booker and Durant, the isolation scorers of this league. Though Booker has stepped up into facilitating, averaging a career-best 7 assists per game, it's disrupted his rhythm on offense. Durant is now trying to get accustomed to a more off-ball running, but even with his elite efficiency, it hardly is because it's obvious the Suns don't have even one true playmaker to run their offense. Atop all that, Beal's skill set as a volume scorer merely overlaps too much with Booker and Durant, leaving the team without the balance or versatility it needs to be successful at the highest level. And the other annoyance is that Beal cannot stay on the court. Injuries have followed him through his career, and this season has not been different. He has already spent time out, and while he has played, he has greatly underperformed. After having averaged about 23 points last season and the one before, Beal has plummeted to an average of just 18.2 points this year. His shooting efficiency has dropped, and the defensive liabilities add salt to the Suns' woes. The truth is, the net rating of the team gets worse with Beal on the floor, and this is indeed accusing for a player who went into the team as a transformative addition. The financial repercussions of the trade has trapped the Suns in ways that might haunt them for years to come. He has such a massive contract that would dwarf all other numbers on this figure, including his playoffs option next year of $57 million for an oft-injured 31-year-old player. The Suns are spending close to $400 million on this roster, including luxury tax penalties. All this season, and for which currently there's not even one player in the playoffs. It is even worse because the Suns do not own their first-round pick until 2031, which all makes reconstruction pretty inflexible should this experiment fail. They traded away the Michael Belia assets in exchange for Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, several second-round picks, and pick swaps. Paul might not have the best times of his career, but his veteran presence and ability to create plays are sorely lacking. The Suns have now lost Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson to the Kevin Durant deal last season, two players integral to previous success. Bridges has blossomed into a borderline all-star with the Brooklyn Nets, making the situation worse as the Suns struggle without him. The Beal trade ripple effects in the Suns' roster construction revealed fatal flaws in their architecture. The Suns are glaringly anemic in the front court. Yusuf Nurkic hasn't come close to DeAndre Ayton. He is a lump, stuck in mobility and defensive inability, which has left the Suns' paint exposed, and he has no box score plus-minus to go along with it. Meanwhile, the bench lacks depth and consistency, leading to a lot of reliance from the big on shoulders carrying heavier-laden burdens. However, the most painful aspect of this suffering for Sun fans is that it had to get this bad. Just 2 seasons ago, Phoenix had the right Formula A franchise-best 64 wins, reaching the NBA Finals in 2021, but after overreacting to their playoff failings, The front office dismantled what was once a coherent, balanced team in favor of the star-studded team that would lack the chemistry and sustainability. The most important thing is that as the season goes on, the Suns will see the window get narrower that they can turn things around. Beal's declining performance and durability create an environment where the team is inflexible and imbalanced. That is hard to see how they salvage the experiment from that position. The Suns put it all in for Bradley Beal, probably the worst bet in the history of the NBA in recent times. A very stark reminder that to build a championship team, it takes far more than just star power. Now, in doing the deal that delivered Kevin Durant to Phoenix, the Suns signed a high-risk contract to place a bet on their chances of mimicking a championship roster. They gave up a lot of their depth in the process. Very painful and dire consequences followed after losing Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, and DeAndre Ayton. Even with great disparity in their defense and rebounding, such hasn't proven better strokes since then. Although adding a superstar like Durant might lift morale across the roster, it hasn't taken very long before they realize they're missing some very critical balance and depth for a faction that hopes to match firepower with its opponent. That was also quite a loss because of the exit of Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson. Bridges was elite for his perimeter defense, but it also defined him as a player who had developed into their best defender, which led the whole team fast breaks. One could seal those potential relentless offenses with his on-ball defense along with scoring ability, meaning he had become arguably the most well-rounded player on the team. Cameron Johnson was the outside shooter with a sniper's range whom the offense system would love to have. He stretched the floor and let Booker and Ayton work down low while providing another much-needed dimension to the offense. The Suns have lost not just two vital contributors, but a whole identity, especially on the defensive end, as a result of their absence. Replacing DeAndre Ayton, a former #1 overall pick, by Jusuf Nurkic has simply proved as a huge downgrade. Though Nurkic brings in a bit of toughness and experience, his contributions have been marginal, especially when compared with Ayton's athleticism, rebounding, and shot-blocking ability. He leaves behind a gaping hole for the Suns in the center position, which Nurkic has not been able to fill. His offensive struggles have been documented well. There is poor rotation and defense on pick and roll, which puts the group at the Suns in trouble at the end of the paint due to Nurkic's stagnant rotations. Below pivoted and persistently substandard negative in box score plus-minus, it creates an unambiguous picture of awful inefficacy on the offensive and defensive sides. Unlike Ayton, he cannot afford the same degree of rim protection or even be an efficient offensive rebounder. At times, Nurkic has also been rather inconsistent on the offensive end. He does not have the same scoring versatility that Ayton had, especially in pick-and-roll situations. Somehow, they have to stress offensively, without any of a top center's dependability on Durant and Booker. This is, without a doubt, unsustainable long-term. The Suns have a mismatch in their offensive flow and have an upside-down front-court player who is not very offensive or defensive at either ends, really. Growingly apparent is how imbalanced the Suns' roster is to compete at a championship level. The front-court depth should have won awards at a ceremony for pathetic failure and left them with aging veterans and untested players to scour the earth for a quick fix. They're just not helping the cause in the clear and hopefully soon-to-be light their path. Outside of Booker, Durant, and Beal, there are very few reliable contributors on the Suns roster. Along with many other decisive issues, there were some very particular bottlenecks, such as the lack of quality role players, making the team weak compared to deeper and better-rounded sides, whereas compression of time by star players could take them into periods of game-changing effect called run. However, hoax limitation consisting of uneven high-level outputs in the remaining areas has been such an undoing. Looking at the bench, it becomes pretty clear that the Suns are in trouble at this point. The second-unit teams have neither scoring nor defense ability, making it very obvious to maintain leads and close games. The team has relied heavily on the starting trio of Booker, Durant, and Beal, but these three have to take responsibility for everything else on the floor. However, it is beyond their abilities. The other teams have exploited the sunk costs of the Suns with a very poor option on their part to make the Stars really welfare benefits. Problems with roster construction for the Suns were exacerbated by having all three of their stars sharing court space. Each of them is immensely talented, but plays a very different style that does not always mesh well with that of the other two. Durant and Booker are two of the most elite isolation scorers in the league, while Beal also shines with the ball in his hands. With an overlap of skills but the absence of depth and balance, the result is a disjointed team grappling for cohesion. Most especially it is frustrating because at one point that team was close-knit and rounded enough to compete for championships. Their defense had usually been their strong point, thanks to players like Bridges, Johnson, and Ayton, and yet the front office decided to go all in for that star-studded lineup, leaving them with too many holes to fill. Because of the lack of those role players, the Suns pay a high price, and without a solid supporting cast, it gets even tougher to achieve their championship dreams. It becomes increasingly clear as the season progresses, the Suns aren't currently quite an even enough roster to compete with the best of the NBA. There is inadequate defensive and rebounding presence, coupled with needing more depth and consistency, and thus, things keep the Suns from maximizing their potential unless there are some major changes. The present situation within the Phoenix Suns' financial dealings has reached a disastrous phase, owing to the multiple sellouts that totally consume an excess of $400 million this season, on luxury tax penalties on a team that is not even participating in the play-in. Despite having a roster replete with star power with Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal, the hope for the Phoenix Suns has not translated to success on the court, and their costly roster is now beginning to raise increasingly serious questions on their financial future. It is hard to keep up spending at this level for a team underperforming to this extent, and the consequences could prove catastrophic. A significant problem is that the Suns do not possess entirely their first-round pick, as that selection belongs to them through trades and shall do so until the year 2031. After that, they get limited flexibility by which they can draft players for building a future. While other associations are busy developing talent through their academy for stable long-term futures, the Suns sold their future in exchange for a present hopeful contention with 3 stars. If things do not get better at the earliest, Phoenix may soon join the catastrophic pathways of the 2013 Brooklyn Nets, a pay-now, play-later scheme which had tried to mortgage its future against aging stars, only to pay with an absolute failure of the plan. In addition to the risk associated with future draft capital, the Suns are stuck with a great number of large contracts that will prove quite difficult to move anytime soon. The biggest of these is Bradley Beal's player option for $57 million in 2027. Beal was previously referred to as one of the best players in the league, but the early signs of aging and a trail of injuries creeping in have begun to wear him down more quickly than before. This only adds to the heavy financial burden that the organization is already carrying and minimizes their ability to adjust their roster as necessary. The Suns have limited cap room because of the pressure tied to Beal and other high-dollar contracts. They are left with few good options when it comes down to completing a deal that sheds contracts or even acquiring additional talent to improve their team. This scenario threatens to doom the Suns. Along with millions paid to a team that has yet to deliver on its promises, they could potentially face a long rebuilding process. If the team is forced to keep these expensive contracts, it will risk turning into a franchise that is shackled to an unproductive and expensive roster. So formidable is the position in which they find themselves that, with little leeway financially, the Suns risk becoming trapped in a cycle of mediocrity, unable either to compete for championships or effectively rebuild. Financially strict, the Suns could find themselves stuck in a really long cycle their underperformance due to overpricing. Phoenix seems destined to sink into a situation where it is perpetually mired in inefficiency. The Phoenix Suns were all set to be a new blueprint for bully ball in the NBA. Instead, they have become the biggest cautionary tale for the league. While there's still time to turn things around, the road ahead here does not seem good for a team with no depth, dwindling stars, and no future assets. What do you think? Is there hope yet for this super team? Or is this the beginning of what would surely be one of the greatest falls in NBA history? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.